All right, today we're going to learn about how to export from Illustrator into an Adobe Dimensions template so that we can create a three-dimensional rendering of our box that we unfortunately aren't able to print and make physically. So the first thing you're going to want to do is open your version of the nuts and bolts project. Hopefully you've got your file organized such that the die lines are separate from your artwork. You probably will have multiple layers. I have just pasted a final into this that was from a PDF. But the idea will be that we'll copy the artwork from here into the template Illustrator file and then use those separate exported images to create a three-dimensional rendering in Dimensions. So once you have your file open, go ahead and open the template file that I put up in the Dropbox for you to use for this purposes. You'll see that the two files are very similar. Again, I have all of the die lines, fold lines, and the glue area as separate layers, but inside one parent layer, which you can turn on and off. And then there was sample artwork from student work from last year in here on its own layer. So the first thing you probably want to do is go ahead and throw away that sample artwork. And then we're going to jump back over to your file. We're going to copy this artwork, create a new layer for it in the template file called artwork. And then we're going to paste your file into here. If you're lucky, it'll already be lined up, but most of the time it's not. So now you're just going to move your file around till it's lined up with these die lines. I find the arrow keys the easiest way to position artwork once you get it fairly close. You'll see on this file that these die lines are just ever so slightly different from the ones that we had in the original template. That was to get this file to align more closely with the Dimensions file. So you might have to adjust your artwork ever so slightly to get it to match this file. This one looks pretty good. This corner here and this corner here is what I'm referencing. And so you can see if I just up and down arrow key until they both look like they're in there correctly, we're in good shape. So the next thing we're going to want to do now that we have this artwork in this template file, we're going to turn off all of the die lines and fold lines, and you can see this file has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 artboards in it. 6 for the pages that are the box, and then 1 for the entire flat artwork. If I go ahead and click my artboard pages, you can see those. And they're all labeled to match what they will be in the final Dimensions file. In order to export all 6 of these artboards simultaneously, if we go under Export, Export for Screens, here, it brings up this window, and there are check boxes next to each one of the artboards. Currently, I don't have this one selected because I'm not going to need it at this point, but I do need the other 6. So I'm going to uncheck that one, and it automatically says, hey, I'm doing the range of 2 to 7. I want to double check where I'm saving these to. In this case, I'm going to save them into the nuts and bolts model folder that has the Illustrator template and the Dimensions template. So that's where I'm going to. Now this part is probably different on your screen right now. I think it starts off defaulting to 1x scale and a PNG file. We're going to change that to make this higher resolution. We're going to switch to exporting these at 4x scale, and instead of doing PNGs, we're going to do JPEGs. So 4x JPEG. Also, I put a prefix on here, Sam, so when it outputs the 6 files, it'll put my name, 4x this, and then it puts the artboard name in there as well. So go ahead and export those, and you'll see that it created those files with that naming convention. It doesn't really matter what naming convention you use, but you definitely want the artboard name in there so you know which piece of artwork goes with which side of the box. All right, so now I am basically done with this file. I'm going to go back, I'm going to turn these die lines on, and now I'm going to save this in the new template with my name, so I know now that that's the one with my design work on it. It's the nuts and bolts template, but it's my final file as opposed to the original template. And now we're done with the first part of getting the artwork out of Illustrator, and now we're ready to bring it into Dimensions. Okay, so now that we have all of our JPEGs that have been exported from the Illustrator file, the next thing we're going to do is jump in here and we're going to open Dimensions. If you haven't downloaded it already, you won't get very far, so go ahead and download Dimensions if you can. And it should open up in that original file I sent you, the template file, has a box that matches our final box. And I already set up the box to have that original artwork from the sample file. And you can see all the artwork is pasted on the various sides of the box. So one of the first things I need to show you is just how to move around in here. First thing, I have set this up to export what's going to be a 1500 pixel by 1200 pixel file. That should be plenty big for our purposes. And you can see here, just like if I were in InDesign or Illustrator or anything else, if I use Command plus and minus, I can zoom in and out on the artboard. This is a little different than zooming in and out on the model. So this is the image that when I render out this file, that shows me what that image will look like. And you can see this gray area here versus this area here, that is my frame. Inside the frame, I can now move the box around. So what I'm doing right now is I'm right-clicking and dragging around. That makes it so I can what's called orbit the model. As you can see, I'm looking at the top. I can even look at the underside. This is the front. I can spin it around, that's the back. So that's just right-click and drag around, and you'll figure it out pretty quickly, especially if you're a gamer at all. It's something you're probably fairly used to. If I hold the space bar and right click, it allows me to pan. So now it's as if I'm moving the object around. I'm going to turn this grid on and it'll make it a little more obvious what I'm doing. In this case, the box isn't moving. It's as if the camera is moving. See that? So, once you get all of your artwork on here, part of what you're going to want to do is set up your camera, as it were, to create the image that you want to create. One that, like, if I were really trying to show what the top of the box looks like, this is a good angle. If I wanted to show maybe what the front of the box looks like, that's a pretty good angle. That might be a better angle. Here's my right side. Here's my left side. If I wanted to show the bottom, I could even render it from here. Anyway, you might want to play around just moving around to figure out how this works. It can be a little disorienting for some people. So how do I get the artwork we created from that new file on here and get this artwork off of here? It works very much like InDesign works, in that since that artwork's on there, I don't want to re-put it on there. I'm just going to relink new artwork. So if this tab isn't open, if none of these tabs are open, I flip that twirl, go to the model, which in this case is the cube box, hit this arrow, and it shows me all of the images that are pasted to that box. If I select one of them and bring up this property window, it shows me it's a decal, meaning it's as if it was a sticker on here. It's got a little bit of texture, which looks really terrible in this preview, but actually looks pretty good in the rendering. And then I can play with what that material looks like. We're not going to mess with these for this particular project. Feel free to play with them, but you won't really need them. What we're going to do now is we're going to take this artwork. Let's just start with the front. Actually, no, let's go top to bottom. That made more sense. So again, I can see that I've got the left side artwork. And rather than me repositioning anything, that's what all of this indication is right here, is where's the artwork on here. I'm going to undo that real quick. And then I can stretch it. I'm going to undo that real quick. Instead, what we're going to do is if you look down here in properties and I click on that little icon, it shows me the artwork, and now I can just click on this folder and choose different artwork. And so now I'm doing the left model here. I output all of my 6 sides, one of which is named left, and I can just replace the new artwork with the old one. And then what I'll do is systematically go through all of these. Now I'm going to do the right side, click on that button again, click on the little folder. Now I find the one that says right. And then I'm going to do the front. Same process. And now the top. And the back. And then finally the bottom. I'm gonna click off of that. And now if you look and I spin this around, you can see that now all of the artwork has changed from the one to the other. It's all positioned the way it was, as if I folded up a real box. If you look really closely, there's a little bit of a seam there. Now I'm going to zoom in I have a roller ball on this mouse. The way you zoom in might be different. At the very least, you can use this zoom button here to zoom in. But if you have some sort of roller wheel or roller ball on your mouse, you can use that. Anyway, this is a little bit off right here. So if I go back to this area and find that top artwork, and I find it's a little bit easier to do if you're kind of straight on like this, and I'm going to zoom out just a hair. It looks like either my artwork isn't coming all the way down to here, which was the case, and so now it's fixed, or perhaps it was I needed to move it. What I did there is I just stretched it. So because I stretched it, I want to go look at the back side and make sure it looks fairly normal and see how this looks a little off. So maybe it was out of position more than it needed to be stretched. So now that comes to here. So probably what's going on is I need to pull this down. And then extend this a little bit. This will make more sense when you play with it. My point is that you'll have to probably come in here and make some tiny little adjustments to get your artwork lined up perfectly, especially if your design is like this one, where there's a seam that goes from one part of the piece of paper to another. But for the most part, I've done all the work for you already. So you should just be able to replace those sides, and it should be fairly accurately lined up. Okay, so now that I've got that all positioned, I'm hitting the space bar. This is a little low. I'm gonna do as if I were taking a camera shot of this thing. I think let's set it up to be here. This would be the shot that shows what the top looks like and the front looks like, and a little bit of this right side. So to make this into an image, I'm going to switch from the design panel, where I've been doing that work, to this render panel. And now I'm going to have it draw this image at higher resolution. So just like normal, you're going to want to check that all of these boxes are doing what you want them to do. I'm going to go ahead and name this number 1 because I plan on doing several renderings. So let's say nuts and bolts box model 1. The quality, depending on your machine, you might have to do a little bit lower quality because this is processor intensive, but I'm going to go ahead and set it at high quality, which means it's slow. I'm going to output a Photoshop file as opposed to just a PNG, and I'll show you why that is later. And then I'm going to just save it to my desktop so I can find it over here. Once I've double checked that these are correct, these settings are correct, I just hit render. This is a very processor intensive program, so it's going to take it, I think it takes mine about 10 minutes to do one of these drawings. And the first thing it does is it does a first pass to give me some sort of rough impression of what this is going to look like. And then now it's trying to tell me about how long it thinks it's going to take to render this. I've found the status bar is really not particularly accurate, but at least gives you some sort of idea. So the first pass is really rough, and you can see it looks like it's not quite centered. That's because my image is bigger than this window. So I could scroll down and see where the bottom is and this corner is. Oops. But that's okay. And now it's done its second rough pass, which gives a little bit grainy, but better impression of what this is going to look like. And then it's just going to sit here, and it thinks it's going to take about 9 minutes. And then there's a little slider that will progress. So rather than us sitting here for 9 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and stop the movie, and we'll pick up when it's done. Okay, and now it's been a few minutes, and you can see that it took it about 7.5 minutes to do this. Your results may be very different. It just depends on the speed of your processors. But you'll notice there's a couple little mistakes here. See, I've got this little weird white line, and that looks like a fold line. There's a little bit of a white line here. I could go back and fix these, or I could just decide to fix them in Photoshop later. If I'm gonna do 5 or 6 different renders, I might just try to realign the artwork a little better so that doesn't happen. But let me show you why this happened and why this is happening as well. It's actually, if I jump back over here to my Illustrator file, when I placed this artwork, I missed a little bit. So again, let me zoom back out. That little white line is being created by the fact that my artwork is a little bit off on the seam here. Also, we've talked about bleed a few times. This little black area right here probably should have extended all the way over this tab on the artwork. Let me get all the way back, zoomed out again. So that area there probably should have continued on out here. If I jump back over it, that's why I'm getting this white line here, is because I'm running out of ink up there. And I'm getting this white line here because I ran out of ink there. Now in this area, I don't have the luxury of just having it bleed all the way over here. I just have to line it up a little bit better. So I could scoot this over, one more click. In this case, maybe I'll just go ahead and drag it ever so slightly. Just doesn't want to let me do it. So there, that's definitely across the line, and it probably won't show up as a mistake. So let's just see if we can't get that exactly perfect. That's pretty good. All right. Again, ideally what I would do here is that this area would have continued out to there, like that. And that way I wouldn't have to worry about the bleed would correct for the fact that that's ever so slightly misaligned. Got a little hitch in there. In this case, it might be worth it to have done that, or it might be easier to just fix the output file. But anyway, so now I have output this file, which in this case, because we did a Photoshop file, here it is on my desktop right there. I'm gonna open that thing in Photoshop, and there it is. What's nice about the integration between these two programs is it automatically makes several layers in Photoshop. One is the object, one is the background, and it does 2 different versions of this render. One it's saying is the rendered image and one is a lower noise version. To me, they look relatively similar. And again, if I wanted to, I could go in here and change the background. So for some reason, brand-wise, it makes sense that this thing is on sort of light blue instead of gray. I could do that. In this case, I think keeping it simple and just gray is fine. But sometimes if I was just doing this one image, it might be easier to jump in here into Photoshop, get rid of the Illustrator in the background, and paint out that little white area so I can jump onto this rendered image, grab my paintbrush, my eyedropper, this exact black right there. So now I'll be painting with that black. There's my brush, and I could just get rid of that little mistake. Just like that. And no big deal. Again, it's up to you. If I was going to do 5-6 more renders, I would probably rather fix the artwork than Photoshop 5 or 6 different drawings. But there you go. So now we have this one image of this box as if we had folded up a physical one. So now I'm going to jump back over here into the design mode in dimensions. And as I said, I could do another render right now from the back side. It's still showing the previous render. When I start a new one, that window will disappear. Or I could show it from here to get this side, or as I said, I could show the bottom. But now that I've got all of this stuff mapped on here kind of the way I want, one of the cool things I can do is I can take this cube and go into edit and duplicate. And it's a little slow, watch it. It hasn't popped up yet. And there it is. So now what I've got going on right now is I've got two boxes sitting exactly in position on top of each other. So I've grabbed a second one. This is known as a gumball. A lot of different programs have this, but they all kind of work the same, which is if I grab this blue arrow, I can move this other object in space. Let me zoom my camera out a little bit here. And now you can see that there's two boxes. One is here. If I wanted this one, I grab the green arrow to get it to go this direction. I can grab the red arrow to get it to go to that direction. I can move it in space this way. What's nice, it wants to sort of snap to ground. See it just jump there at the last second. That tells me I'm on the ground. And if I grab this little square area, you can see it stretches the thing, which I don't want to do. So I'm going to hit undo. And that works in every dimension as well. I could stretch it that way or this way. You're not going to want to play with those, but you might want to play with, you can see how it's showing me that around this axis, this green thing here lets me rotate. Or I can rotate around this axis, which looks pretty freaky deaky when it goes through the floor. Undo that. And so I can continue to move this object around in a way that, so maybe what I'm trying to do is this is the front of the box. Maybe in one rendering I show the front and the back of the box as if I had two of them, and in the photo studio I just wanted to show the front and the back. I could also rotate it this way, and if I hold shift, it snaps to 45-degree angles. And let's say I want to put one standing on edge right here. Move it in here. Point is, you can position these things any which way you want to get the render you want. And that looks a little weird because it's upside down. So what if I did that? But you can do some pretty interesting things as if you were just in a photo studio setting things up. So maybe I have this in the foreground, that in the background. And again, once I get my angle set up, the highlight's a little bit problematic. So maybe a little bit more from the top. And then I'm going to zoom out just a hair. And there we go. Look, there's another angle maybe that I want to photograph. So once I get it set exactly the way I want, again, I jump back over to render. It's still showing the old rendering. Now I'm going to call this number 2 and hit render again. And so this will take probably another 10 minutes to render. But I'm going to cancel that real quick. I'm going to show you one more feature and we'll get 2 for 1. One of the other things I can do with this camera, it has a depth of field setting, which works very much like we've done in the photo studio, where if I get super zoomed in on something, well, the closest, I can pick an area to be in focus and then the rest of it's out of focus. It really creates a lot of dimensionality to images like this, especially when I'm just trying to show multiple things at once. So the way this works, you can adjust the blur amount. I have found that you have to set it really, really low for it to look right. And then I can pick what I want to focus on. So let's say I want to focus on that corner. Whoops, gotta reselect the camera. Right now it's focusing there. I'm gonna reset it to right there. And in the preview, it looks really terrible, but when we render this out, you'll see it actually looks quite good. I'm going to put it right on that part number. And as you've seen with a real mechanical camera, depth of field really looks most correct when you're really close up to an object. It looks more realistic. It looks kind of fake if you're not close to the object. I'm gonna reset it on the name of this product. Go back to camera, focal point, put it right there. I'm gonna jump back over, render this, which replaces the one because I didn't change the name. Here's my preview, and we'll be back in 10 minutes. And then as you can see, it takes a little bit longer when you have that effect on. So this one took about 11.5 minutes, but it really, I feel like that was a little bit overdone, but you get the idea. It creates the sense of depth in a way that you can do it with the camera. Actually, sort of zoomed in here, but yeah. So the basic idea is you're going to export individual little panels from this layout using the export for screens feature. They're already automatically mapped in the model via the cube mapping feature. You select every one of those. You'll click on that side's piece of artwork, or what it calls a decal. Swap out for the new artwork that you've created. And then go in and set your camera. Find an angle you find interesting and render it out. And this isn't necessarily required. I just thought it would be an interesting way for you to make your project look more real than you'd be able to otherwise.